Welcome everyone to the 2021 Housing Choices Australia Oswald Barnett Oration. I'm Heather McCallum, the Chair of Housing Choices Australia. Thank you for coming out tonight and joining us on a lovely spring, or autumn I should say, evening and joining us. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting tonight. I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also to acknowledge any Aboriginal elders joining us here from other communities this evening. It has been such a long and difficult year for everyone since we last came together in February 2020. Going out in Melbourne is still something we're all getting used to, and that many of you have come tonight demonstrates our collective commitment to such an important cause. COVID-19 has changed a lot of the ways that we do things, and I think being here is a prime example of that. This year we meet in a car park, so who would have thought that 12 months ago? For those who don't know, this summer the Naomi Milgram Foundation and its MPavilion team weren't able to commission their usual amazing architectural structure in its traditional place opposite Hamer Hall. Faced with no meeting place for its ambitious summer program of events, the MPavilion applied its boundless energy and ingenuity, and with the support of the City of Melbourne, created this outside-the-box, COVID-safe, reimagined space where Melburnians have been able to gather, showing us that against all odds, life goes on. But I did think it was an unusual twist that outside-the-box thinking has ended up with us thinking inside the box. So I think that's a reflection of how unpredictable the world is. This place has been a hub for Melbourne's cultural, intellectual, music and artistic life since January, a beacon of hope for thousands of people over what has been a difficult summer. I understand they've even held roller discos here, and I'm sure our panel is quite pleased that they didn't double book the event for the evening. But now tonight, as they've done for the last 3 years, the MPavilion has generously made its safe space available for us, to our sector, and to you as we come together for our annual check-in on our collective progress, the challenges, and the opportunities for change. So, how are we doing? Building homes for people in need. Let's face it, because of COVID-19, there is now even more need than ever. The pandemic has been hard on everyone in our community, but this has been hardest on our most vulnerable, including people who struggle to find a place to live, and even more particularly for people living in a state of homelessness. By coming together for this event, I'm pleased to say in increasing numbers each year, we're demonstrating our collective desire to keep housing at the top of everyone's agenda in Melbourne and Victoria. We cannot take our foot off the pedal, nor temper our ambition. There are still not enough safe, affordable, and accessible homes to house all Australians, and there must be. That is our task at Housing Choices Australia, our responsibility as a sector, a community, and indeed as a society. We have a lot to get through in the next hour as our expert panel talks through some of these serious issues, and enjoy what will be, and I'm sure, an interesting and stimulating conversation. And please stay on afterwards until 8:30 to catch up with colleagues and enjoy the COVID-safe catering in this slightly unusual but quite lovely setting on a perfect autumn evening. I am delighted now to hand over to my colleague, Housing Choices Managing Director Michael Lennon. Michael is a well-known and highly respected figure across housing, planning, development, and government sectors in Australia, and is going to double up as panel host tonight. Michael is a relentless advocate for reform, innovation, and progress in good housing for all Australians. And for the next hour, he will lead this year's panel of housing experts as they look back on an extraordinary 12 months in the housing sector in Victoria since we met in February last year, and most importantly, to what lies ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone for giving up your time this evening. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here. And in these initial comments and any introduction, we now get used to acknowledging the original owners of the land where we meet. But we find ourselves in a circumstance where almost for the first time in a generation, we might actually be able to give meaning to that in the housing world. So through the big housing build in Victoria, we have a serious opportunity to do something material about Aboriginal disadvantage in the housing space. And with all of your assistance, I sincerely hope that we can do that. Sorry?
Speaker's giving you feedback, so move away from the speaker.
The speaker is giving me feedback and it's not good. Okay, I'll get even more red than I usually am. And just by way of housekeeping, I just wanted to say that if any of you had come to the wrong place and if you're supposed to be at the garden party at the Melbourne Club, if you could just leave discreetly and politely, that would be great. On behalf of the housing sector, the housing associations and others in Victoria, we host the Oswald Barnett Oration every year. Now, Oswald Barnett was truly a giant of a human being, and many of you know this story. He was both, he was a missionary man, he was a Methodist, he was an accountant by training, and he put his values and his pennies to good work. He believed strongly in a lot of things, and particularly the basic right of everyone to have a decent home. And you all know the story that by his agitation and by his forceful advocacy on behalf of the poor and the underprivileged, he led to a whole series of reforms which saw the formation of the Housing Act, the Housing Commission, and all of the programs that led to the post-war public housing program in Melbourne. He was a beacon of his time, and he's a beacon of light for everyone involved in this space at this point in history. So every year, when we honour the contribution that Oswald Barnett made, we have to think about what does that mean in contemporary life. A year ago, we canvassed the landscape of housing politics in Victoria, and then we had Minister Richard Wynne, the head of the Property Council at that stage. The head of NIFIC was here from Canberra, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp, and our own people from our own sector. It was a sparky conversation, very much focused on policy and funding. But look what's happened in the space of 12 months. The key thing now is not only to capture that momentum, but to deliver the promise that's been made. But it is worth quickly listing all of the achievements during this time. So the social housing growth funds in Victoria have been completed to date. The big housing build has been assembled and funded. New approval processes for projects have been put in place. There have been 2 actual rounds of NIFIC bond-priced funding. The City of Melbourne has produced its own housing strategy. The next round of public housing renewal tenders have been issued and largely are now being completed. And of course, Homes Victoria was put into place. And we discovered that we could, if we had the will, eradicate homelessness, just as they have done in many Scandinavian countries. So during that time, the homeless were relocated temporarily to accommodation across the city. And I would also note that during this time, Assemble launched a very new build-to-rent model in Melbourne and elsewhere. So if you worked in the housing sector, this has been a remarkably positive period and one full of promise. So we now have a great big bunch of housing and policy and platforms in place, and now the only thing we have to do, of course, is deliver. So our oration this year is not a paper. It's short in politics, but long on practice and experience. And it's against that background we have these outstanding people here to give us their perspectives on how we're going to achieve the outcomes. So I'd like you to join with me to welcome Homes Victoria CEO Ben Rimmer, Homes Victoria Chief Development Officer Michelle Morrison, from the City of Melbourne, the Director of City Strategy Emma Appleton, and a live example of the new kind of private sector participation in affordable housing, Chris Duff from Assemble. Please join with me in welcoming our panel. So, I might begin by asking a kind of direct person to each of them. And it would be unfair to put Ben Rimmer in the shoes of Oswald Barnett, so I'll do just that. So Ben is, as many of you know, is a hugely experienced public and civic figure. He's worked in central agencies in Victoria and in Canberra. He's been the CEO of the City of Melbourne, and he has taken upon himself this enormous task to re-navigate the social and affordable housing landscape in the country. So for the audience, as a way of beginning, Ben, tell us what went through your mind in the formations of Homes Victoria and the way in which you hope the institution will work.
Thanks, Michael. Can I also start by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and the very vibrant city that's been built on their lands that were never ceded. Great question. So I guess for me, Homes Victoria is about bringing together three separate things. One is we manage the public housing asset on behalf of the people of Victoria and the public housing tenancies, and our relationships with public housing tenants are central to who we are and what we do. And that's one of the three things that really brings us together. Then on top of that, we have a role in driving growth and development in the broader social housing sector through our relationships and our partnerships with the community housing sector, and through using our own assets to get an even better outcome for the people of Victoria, more housing for more Victorians, as it says on the sticker. The third thing that we're doing, and this takes us into territory that Chris knows well, is the government has asked us to invest in affordable housing. And the reason why that has happened is because, first of all, we want to create great communities. We want to create communities that have a mixture of tenure types, a mixture of dwelling styles, a mixture of organisations involved. Secondly, it was pure economic stimulus in the middle of an economic crisis. And thirdly, I think the government saw an affordable housing sector that was doing some good work, and people like Chris doing really great work, but that wasn't delivering enough of the right kind of product quickly enough. There was lots of talk, but less delivery of real new housing. And so a really strong sense that they wanted to put that into the mix as well. So if you put all of that together, Homes Victoria is a new team, a new agency, but built on very solid foundations from Oswald Barnett on. And we don't forget any of that heritage. We don't forget any of that obligation to current tenants, to people who are currently waiting on the housing waiting list. But we're also taking the next steps in terms of driving growth and development and new models of thinking. And for me, the real test of this initiative is not so much whether we deliver the 12,000 homes, because we will do that. In fact, we'll deliver more like 15,000, 16,000 homes over the next 4 years. The test isn't whether we'll deliver those. The test is whether we, working together, working with everyone in this room, to be frank, build a movement that actually creates a permanent change in the way we think about social housing in Victoria. And that's the government's ambition. They're not in this just for the immediate sugar hit of economic stimulus, if I can put it like that. They are in this because they believe in a significantly enhanced role for social housing going forwards, one that complements their work on family violence, that complements their work on mental health, that complements their work on precinct development, and that brings it all together into a sustainable system of management of social housing for the long term.
Well done. Well said, Ben. And I think many people will be hugely encouraged by the sense in which you're making systemic reform, that the ambition is bigger than the number. It's a different way of managing society. Ben has populated the new agency not only with a number of very experienced staff from the Director of Housing's office, but he's also recruited significant new people and people who have fresh eyes and fresh thinking into the space. And so Luc Boucher, whom I've been working with, who's worked in policy and an NDIS, and Hayley Parks and Michael Smith and others who know the sector very well. But Michelle, we are absolutely delighted and enthused about your participation. Michelle Morrison has a long history in complex projects and project delivery, including public-private funded projects, and before this had 7 years with Capella Finance. So Michelle, I guess we are intrigued as well as delighted that you took up this role, given the complexity of the project landscape. Can you give us a sense of the personal attraction that's in this for you in professional terms?
Thanks, Michael. What a great question. I decided probably quite a few years ago, that I was pretty good at delivering projects, and I made a conscious decision that I was only going to work on social infrastructure projects again. And for the last 10, 15 years, I've worked in health. The last 7 years with Capella Capital, which was a fantastic time of my life. I was fortunate enough to be the CEO of the Bendigo Hospital Consortium, and with the Capella team, the Vespa team and the Bendigo Hospital team, we won every award that you could possibly win. We delivered the project ahead of schedule, and really, you know, as a benchmark, it's something that I and a massive team, army of people, are very proud of, the work that we did there. So it was sort of hard to, how do you beat that act? And then Ben Rimmer phoned me and said to me, what about housing? And I sort of said, oh, what about housing? Okay, it fits my social infrastructure rule, which I'd put on myself years ago. And then I learned a little bit about what the government was planning on doing. And how could I say no? What a fantastic opportunity to go and prove myself in a whole new sector and deliver fantastic outcomes that will have a real impact on the people that we're providing the homes for. So I'm really proud to be here, and I'm very happy to be here. I miss my Capella team, and I know there's some here tonight, so thank you. But it is an opportunity that is a once-in-a-lifetime situation that I just couldn't say no to.
Right, thank you. Chris Duff. Chris is a property developer, unashamedly so, and traditionally developers are, by necessity, driven by profit and a desire for loud shirts and other things. And yet, you seem to have very few of at least those things, Chris. Chris has dedicated his intellect and his commercial nous to try and find a way to bring affordable and community housing to the market in a commercial way. So why this? Why aren't you building shopping centres and for sale commercial apartments? What is it in this space, Chris, that represents the personal challenge?
Thanks, Michael. I've got a linen shirt and sunglasses on, so if I had board shorts, I could be on the beach at Noosa like all the other property developers in Australia. But so thanks for the introduction, and I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. And also, a sort of separate acknowledgement, I'd like to sort of congratulate the Andrews government and Ben and the team on the work they're doing in housing. It is a sort of really significant step forward, and been very big supporter of the Andrews government, across school building, infrastructure building, social housing building as infrastructure. So we think that's really terrific work. So I guess I won't go through the sort of whole sort of career journey and everything else as to why I've ended up where we've ended up, but I will talk about how we look at housing, and we look at the housing continuum. So we look at sort of from homelessness, public housing, social housing, community housing, shared equity, rent to buy, full ownership, and the different incomes to which those models are applicable. And then we sort of look at saying, well, how can we, in private capital markets, so superannuation investors, banks, etc. How can we mobilise that capital into housing strategies for people that find housing quite difficult, you know? And housing's linked to income, right? You've got no income, you know, maybe homeless or really struggling, very little income, public housing, social housing, community housing, a bit more income, you own a home, probably a lot of income. Okay, so, and how can we develop various strategies that are investable for-profit strategies for our supporters, the superannuation industry, for example. So, and profit's important to them because their role as organisations is to deliver returns to give their members a better retirement. So they're not there like public capital is to just, you know, invest for potentially social outcomes or other outcomes. So for-profit strategies, they're pretty moderate profits, and the impact's important, and the impact does drive a lot of capital into our strategies. But really where we've landed now is we've crossed Melbourne and Brisbane. Now we've got a portfolio of about 5,500 apartments. We've got a couple of thousand of those apartments out for tender at the moment in Melbourne, and we're partnering with the community housing sector for our build-to-rent portfolio. So we see build-to-rent as an asset class, as an opportunity to deliver housing for people that find housing really difficult. We don't see it as an opportunity to charge 20% more market rent because you've sort of got a day spa and a cigar room and a sort of really fancy pool, you know, in the building. So, and that's an international observation. That's not something we've cooked up, and we've seen more pension fund investors in North America, continental Europe, a little bit more now in the UK. Where are they actually investing their capital, and why are they attracted to lower income housing? Because it's highly stable, highly predictable cash flows over time for those investors. So we've developed models. We've got a team of 40 people in the office. You know, we've had some good success with Australian Super and a couple of the other industry funds that are looking to partner with us now to be able to deploy their members' capital into housing strategies to help people that are, you know, finding housing pretty difficult. And a key part of that's been partnership with the community housing sector. Okay, so to manage people who are on very low incomes, to partner with Housing Choices Australia, you know, in our example, to allow them to manage 1 in 5 dwellings, which will be for someone off the social housing waiting list, and then we'll sort of look after, you know, the other 4 tenants, but in a fully integrated model. So the social tenant will have the same access to our services in the same sort of build-to-rent context. So, and trying to really sort of break down in a fully integrated housing model. Every 5th door will be a social door. Every 5th door will have exactly the same fit out internally. So, and we're sort of really trying to help upcycle people through housing as well. So it's really exciting for us. It's really exciting for our investors as well. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And from our perspective, Chris, I think this really is taking us all into new territory, and we're enormously impressed not just by the ambition, but by the fact that we've had a breakthrough. Our 4th panellist tonight shares a number of things with me. Most importantly, we both worked in Glasgow. But Emma came back to Melbourne and took on the job of city strategy at a time where the city of Melbourne has been growing exponentially. So these are growth rates that we really haven't seen since the 19th century. 1.3 million people in 10 years. When Ben, your colleague, was at the council at the helm in many ways. The city now, of course, has been, like all central cities, hit by the pandemic. So given the investment the City Council made in a housing strategy, Emma, where does social and affordable housing now fit within the Council's ambitions for Melbourne? How do we see it come to light?
Great, thanks Michael. And look, I would say it's very centrally within the City of Melbourne now. We've gone on a bit of a journey, and Ben knows it well because I started my journey at the City of Melbourne with Ben, where there wasn't much space within the political environment for us to engage in affordable housing. But through very determined work from many people, there's a few people in the audience today from the City of Melbourne, bringing together the evidence base of the need, which was startling and defined that we had a crisis to manage. And previously it had thought that we didn't have a role to play within that, but we are the Capital City Council and we advocate very strongly in that space. So once we had defined that need, we're in a really strong position, and it did turn out it was a change of Lord Mayor as well and a change of council that suddenly felt they had a role to play. And it also came alongside the homelessness issue that was very prevalent on our streets and something we all know should not be happening in a city like Melbourne or in a country like Australia. So all of those things coming together really gave us the time and space to actually put forward an ambitious strategy for change. Some of the people who I've worked with for a while, when we got it through in December 2020, the Affordable Housing Strategy, which set out a really ambitious plan, both for us to develop on some of our sites, for us to advocate very strongly to state on things like inclusionary zoning to get a sustainable funding source and housing levies, to get sustainable funding mechanisms through state, to partner with the private market, to support community housing sector. When we got that through, we couldn't quite believe it. It had been quite a journey, but I would say that there was very bold ambition within the council at the time and just determined. We were determined. I think as well, I would say, coming from the UK after 10 years, coming back into Melbourne, having had a baby, so I got a bit sort of, a little even more determined to make a better world, and going into my first negotiation in Docklands and saying to the developer, and they were developing a very large-scale building, not one of a scale I'd seen for some time, and saying, so what, 30% affordable housing? Is that what you're going to deliver? How are you delivering that? And I'll never forget it, because they all just went, what are you talking about? In London at that time, anything over 10 dwellings was delivering between 30 and 50% under the Mayor Ken Livingstone, and it was just standard practice. It was obviously supported by extremely good funding models and a community housing sector which was very strong, but coming back into a culture where it wasn't even, considered that it was part of the private market option was quite concerning. So look, I just wanted to acknowledge people, Tanya, Bridie, Nina, Nanette in the audience today for fighting the fight for a little while, and also the courage of the council to take it on.
And Bridie and her team, I think, did a fabulous job. And I think the city is asserting the importance of affordable housing for a whole range of reasons, especially and including economic ones for the city. I wonder whether we can take up one of the themes that went through all of your comments, which is really about the legacy. It's an enormous achievement to have raised the money and to put in place structures. What we all know is that the buildings are going to last a very long time. And the world is littered with good intent in the physical environment. So Ben and Michelle, how within the budget constraints that we have, do we keep an eye on quality, on design, on integration within existing neighbourhoods? How do we avoid the community debates that divide rather than bring people together?
That's a great question as well. Thank you, Michael. One of the things that we say now at Homes Victoria is that we're creating homes that we would all live in. We're going to make sure they're tenure blind. We want to have a sense of place. Dwelling topology is really important. We're going to have 7-star NAITHs, 5-star Green Star. Electric charging facilities, they're going to probably have faster NBN than my house has. And we're working really closely with the Office of Victorian Government Architects, so they are working across us to make sure we get quality design. I don't think good quality design means expensive. You can actually still do good quality design on a budget. So it is really important that we provide places that people can go home to with a sense of pride and feel like that they're home. And I don't want to be involved in delivering homes that you can walk down the street and cross the road, and I've seen people do that with some of our existing estates. I want it to blend in with the community.
Okay, look, I'll come back and we're going to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. And I think we recognise that there's a balance between investment in the existing physical stock as well as creating new supply, Michelle.
Yes, there was a $500 million announcement prior to the $5 billion announcement for upgrading existing housing, and that program is well underway. I'm sure we'll get a question on that later. So, but it is about raising the bar, and I don't think that expensive equals quality. I think you can have good quality design that looks good with open spaces at natural light, and as I said, we are now saying we will only deliver homes that we would live in.
So thinking about Ben and Chris especially, today and yesterday in the media, we're already seeing community debates at the municipal level, and I don't want you to comment on projects, but the apprehension that people have about the impact of these developments, what that will do to property values, the behaviours that people expect. What are the ways from your perspective that you think we can build confidence in how this integration can work?
Well, I've had a lot of first-hand experience in existing communities, and there's sort of almost like the sort of fear that they're going to catch poverty from these people if they sort of move into their neighbourhoods and whatever else, and sometimes it's very hard to break down, but our sort of solution for that, and I don't think there's necessarily a golden bullet for it, is to just offer the fully integrated model. So, there'd be no reason, it's not something we sort of go and advertise like a planning application. It's just a planning application for a certain building. Who's going to be living there is sort of really our business to sort of determine. So, but we do think, having a fully integrated model, and Michelle just mentioned, it is very important to that. So we don't sort of have one building for people that have got a bit less money than the other people, the residents. So, and we think that also helps the people that are struggling a bit in housing and struggling a bit, just in life, to sort of be able to upcycle. So we're trying to avoid very high concentrations of very low income housing in any of our projects.
And Ben?
I was just going to add to that. I don't think historically we've done a particularly good job of engaging where we're going to do development work. As Emma knows, that's something I railed against a bit when I was in a previous job. And I think that actually came from good intention, right? We literally have had, as an organisation, so little money that we've really prioritised every dollar going into upgrades or maintenance or growth in housing stock. And I think we've cut corners historically on engagement. And I think that's been counterproductive. And I think we're now working very hard to try and engage more and better and earlier. I think there's kind of at least 3 levels of community response. There's one level of community response which is actually quite professional, engaged, rational feedback for a development about, I guess I think of this as like the professional council officer feedback, where there's actually some really good feedback about, well, why put the cross over there, why not put it there, that kind of stuff. Then there's some community feedback which is really, we just want to understand what you're doing and why and when and how will it impact us and what does that mean for traffic and all of that kind of stuff, and that's completely reasonable and rational. And then there's a third level of community feedback which is effectively pure dislike of having anyone who might be poor in a particular location. There's a lot of language that you hear from people about, I'm a complete supporter of social housing, but just not in this street, or, that kind of language. And there is a definite extent to which that kind of logic has been blocking housing development, social housing development through the planning system. And that's why we asked the government to give us some fast-tracking mechanisms through the planning system. It's frankly not to get over good quality engaged feedback, and we have a very strong obligation under the new arrangements to do much better feedback and engagement with professional council officers, with local residents and that kind of stuff. But it does mean that we're no longer going to let an angry and disillusioned group of local residents stop a development for some months, some years. And to put this in very practical terms, there are lots of people in Victoria right now who want jobs on construction sites, and I currently have about $350 million worth of construction project that's waiting for a planning permit. And I just don't think that's good enough. There are people on the waiting list who need housing. There are people who want construction jobs. There are companies who want to do the work to make those projects come to life. And in some cases there are some legitimate questions and good engagement backwards and forwards about how to make a project better. But in many cases it's not that. And we just need to be really clear about calling that out.
I was just going to say that, Melbourne's got a long history of great designers, architects, landscape architects, urban designers engaging in projects such as this. And just to hats off to Ben for really going through procurement that enables really great people who are very experienced in housing to engage in a big build, and Michelle as well. Because I think the procurement stage and getting those good thinkers in early, getting the quality standard up, getting that recognised, tenure blind, really good quality, really good neighbourhood presence is essential for us to continue this build into the future. So both procurement, making sure that design expertise is central to, and equal to the financials, and really getting them in early and really pushing that so it doesn't cost more, that it's integrated and thought through. And Chris, you've been an amazing advocate of great design. And then going through design review processes to keep us all honest, right? So that peer review at really key strategic points to really get the best value out of every dollar that Victoria's spending on this. So it's a legacy piece.
This design question is, I think, immensely important. My friend and colleague, Kirsty Mackay, who's the government architect in South Australia, is here tonight. So a week past on Saturday, we were at the nominations for the National Awards, the Institute of Architects National Awards. And in the category we were in, the apartments before overlooking parklands were priced at $3.7 million. Our units were $360,000. And the design effort that had gone in to the cheap apartments was actually fabulous. And it was all about what you were saying, about getting the thinking at the right stage. Chris, as well as investing in design, the other thing I'd want to open up is the capacity for us to see the housing problem in new ways. Tell us about the journey that Assemble has been on with capital markets, trying to convince them that a new asset class is possible, and how did you manage to get institutional investors into the space at such a scale?
Well, it's been a long journey. The initial investment from Australian Super into our sort of build to rent to own model, which is a home ownership pathway, that was about a 2.5 year process with them, and they acquired 25% of the management platform, which will deliver and manage those assets. And really, compared to traditional apartment development, the sort of returns that we're generating for the equity investors are probably 1/4 to 1/3, but they're longer term, more stable investment returns. So there's 7-8 year investments in that instance. In our build to rent for social and affordable housing, we model 60-year holds for our investors. So we do very complex life cycle investment models, and we're sort of generating high single digit returns for those investors. And we had to start doing, because the asset classes don't really exist in Australia, so we had to start doing asset class comparisons with market risk, right? So there's still, even if you're below market and you say, well, there's always going to be demand for housing that's 20 or 30 or 40% below market, there's still market risk there that at some point you might not have tenants. So we say, well, what are these investors otherwise investing in? So, is it office buildings? Is it toll roads that are subject to potential market risk in toll usage, for example, and try to give some domestic comparisons, and then also use international benchmarks and say, well, what are pension fund investors globally going into? So we were able to get the returns to a level that we thought was sufficient and comparable to other similar risk asset classes. And the reality is that the Australian superannuation investors are looking for investable opportunities domestically. That's the 4th biggest pension fund market in the world. So we've got North America, Canada, Japan, Australia by dollars, right? So there's plenty of money in the system, and they are looking for deeply impactful investment opportunities. So, but high single digit returns for full greenfield risk, where you're going and letting, we're going to be letting $1.2 billion worth of construction contracts in the next 12 months to build out this portfolio of projects. There's a lot of risk in that. So the impact piece was fundamental to mobilising them into. So the environmental and social impact of our projects and having a really strong governance framework around that was something that was really key to getting them off the bench into housing.
enormously impressed by the initial investment, the conceptual thinking that's behind the assembled model. Michelle, this is territory that you're familiar with. We used the term social infrastructure, and I remember asking the head of AMP, social infrastructure, what that meant, and they said anything with a government cash flow. So, but
It's not quite how I see it.
in that row, so it was prisons, ports, whatever you can think of. But in this new environment, Michelle, what opportunities do you see for more innovative financing and delivery models than we might have been used to in the past?
I think there are a lot of opportunities at the moment, and I think our eyes are wide open to look at opportunities, and we welcome different ways of delivering outcomes. We want to get. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is speed to outcome. We really need to get moving quickly, so some of these models do take a bit longer, but I think that we have got some excellent results out of some of the models that we've gone through recently. They haven't yet been announced, so I can't probably talk about them too much. So, but when we get to that stage, I'm sure the Minister will be making an announcement on something that's happened recently. But we are looking at many different models. I've got the private partnership stream under my wing as well. We had a tender close late last year for ready to build developments, and we had 299 bids. So I came in on the 17th of December, and I think we blew up the Tenders Vic website. And if you can imagine the team trying to unpack 299 bids and work through them, where the boss here is saying to me, "Why haven't you appointed contracts yet?" I said, "It took us 6 weeks to work out which were good bids and which weren't." But we are getting very close to start appointing some of those ready to develop sites that developers have had underway that may have been stalled during COVID or stalled for other reasons. So we have, we are moving, which is good, but we are looking at many other ways of delivery as well.
And sorry, Chris?
So just one other point on what's going to sort of, we think, really enhance the drive of private capital into housing is the resilience of the asset class during 2020, right? So you're a mall owner, like Vicinity, what's your sort of, there's been no rent in your malls because they've all been shut. Commercial office has been the same. So for people that might other toll roads, horrible. So for people that otherwise might invest in infrastructure or other real assets, then they've seen the resilience of housing and the ability to get government support for lower income housing in particular during really difficult times, really underwrite the resilience of housing as an asset class and that investment thematic for our investors in, you're investing in a fundamental human need, right? You're right at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid there. So, you've got, shelter as a fundamental human need, and our investors look at it and they say, it's unlikely that in 40 years, someone's going to need a 2-bedroom apartment materially differently to what they need it today, right? So you go to Elwood and look at a 60s walk-up, and it's very similar in format and layout to the sort of housing that we deliver today. So there's always going to be a requirement for that shelter. So that's one of the big themes that we keep hearing from our investors.
So I'm going to open this up to questions and comments in a couple of minutes. So if I can ask you to consider the topics that might be of interest. Ben, we've talked a lot about buildings and we've talked a lot about money, but at the end of this, it's actually the lives that occur within the buildings that matter, and they're the outcomes we really need to focus upon ultimately. So in this sense of moving into new horizons and working different ways, your perspective, Ben, on the partnerships that you're building across the board, the service relationships, the way in which people with often troubled circumstances can be supported as well as the physical stock?
Yeah, I think we've tended to focus on the dwelling, the house, and not really on the home or what's required to keep a stable home. And what that's meant is that we haven't looked at the different needs of different groups of people who might need housing support. And we're increasingly trying to do that. There's a lot of thinking, obviously, following the Royal Commission on Mental Health about how we better support people experiencing mental health challenges with their housing needs. Even at a smaller scale, but a very important scale, the important needs of young people leaving state care, for example, that are quite different from other housing needs experienced by other young people. So there's a lot of work for us to do in that area, and one of the most exciting things that's happened in the last 12 months is the From Homelessness to a Home program. You know, Michael talked about the fact that we, during the height of the pandemic, had a lot of people who were formerly sleeping rough in accommodation for really for the first time, in some cases in many, many years. And so we've now, the government has asked us to work with the sector and work with housing support partners to try and get that cohort into stable, ongoing housing. We have about 2,000 places in that program. About 1,000 of those homes are homes that either we've purchased in the last 3 or 4 months or homes that we already own. But each home is going to be partnered with a support package, partnered with connection with agencies that have skills and experience in particular needs of particular groups of people, whether that be alcohol and other drugs, or even kind of for an older cohort, we're working quite closely with Wintringham, for example, in this program. So that program is incredibly exciting. It really does reflect the government choosing to make a significant difference for a small number, a relatively small number of people who need the most significant levels of housing support in our community. And it's a direct result of the pandemic and the opportunities and issues that arose during the pandemic. And we're incredibly excited about delivering it. By its very definition, it's new work with new groups of people in a challenging post-COVID environment. So it's not without its difficulties. It has given a number of us in the room some cause for lack of sleep in the last month or two. But it's incredibly exciting and good work, and I'm really proud of the work that the team are doing on that topic. And I think it points to a broader issue, which is that we need to do more for existing public housing tenants, but also, frankly, right across the community housing sector to meet the needs and interests of our individual tenants and actually support them in a better and more effective way.
Yeah, I think, Ben, we're all tremendously encouraged by Homelessness to Home and dealing with people often in the most complex circumstances. I want to turn now to give you the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Can I ask you to identify yourself, please, and to perhaps keep your comments and questions as brief as you can. Yes, the man with the hat down the back. Sorry, we're going to give you a microphone, Les.
My name's Ben, thank you for your talk. I can't remember where I read it, but I read somewhere that the post-war Menzies commission flats, the estates, 30% of those were kept vacant for a potential crisis. As far as I know, the COVID crisis didn't feel any of those commission flat houses. So there's plenty of stock already existing that is vacant. And it's good that it provides industry for builders and architects, but what about the stock that already exists?
Okay, Ben?
Nice to meet you, Ben. A really good question. So we do have, it's true, the point you make is absolutely right, that during the COVID crisis, we quite deliberately chose to reduce the amount of people living in some of our highest density high-rise towers. And that was really a direct result of public health advice about the density of living circumstances in those places. The downside of that has been that we've had less housing to allocate in the last few months, or really the last bit of last year. The upside of that is that we've... Sorry, mate, it's quite hard to hear you up the front. Talking about the people who've gone into hotels. Right. So we've got about nearly 1,000 people who are still living in hotels across Victoria as a result of the COVID crisis, and the Homelessness to a Home program is working as fast as we can to try and provide good, safe housing options for people in those circumstances. So the COVID crisis has been really profound for us and for a lot of people in the community in terms of how we manage all of these issues. It's been really challenging.
Thank you. Yes, down in front. I'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Corey Memory. I'm a resident of the public at Carlton Housing Estate, and I'm also the I got awarded the Community Champion for 2020 for the City of Melbourne last year at the COVID-19 Heroes, and I'm a spokesperson for the Public Housing Residents Network and the Save Public Housing Collective. Now, public housing is...
Can you hold your microphone closer?
Sorry. Public housing is charged at 25%, where the social housing is going to be at 30% rate. Now, a person such as myself, on the job seeker, becomes $890 better off in public housing over a year. A single parent with a 5-year-old is just under $1,500 better off over a year in public housing. And a single pensioner is $1,680 better off over a single year. Now, that could offset the energy costs for a family for the whole year. If the government is seriously involved in that 30% is way too much for an income. Now, affordable housing, 80% of market rent. Now, that's ridiculous. On a property that's $375 a week, ends up $460 out of a pocket for a person like myself on job seeker, and that is including rent assistance. Now, for somebody who earns $52,000, which is the limit on receiving affordable housing, $300 a week is actually 30% of their income. Now, if they are earning less than that income on that rent, they are paying more than 30% per week. And if they've got a higher charge rent, they're still paying, and again, they're paying more than 30% rent. Now, haven't we learnt as well to stop selling state-owned assets? You know, like, it ends up costing everyone more. We need to abolish this concept of social and affordable housing and replace it with a better public housing, big build concept immediately, and establish a public housing ombudsman. Now, the questions I have is, how will this strategy help solve homelessness and waiting lists? I think it'll make things worse. And will the new properties that are being built have solar panels to help offset energy charges?
So I think the first part was really a statement of opinion, Ben, but on the second question about assistance for homelessness and how this will deal with energy savings?
Sure. So the direction that we're taking now is to strengthen public housing in a way that hasn't been achieved in the last 30 years. And the big housing build has a large number of new dwellings, but it also has, and through a different program, but it also has a significant injection of money into public housing, ongoing maintenance and upgrade and things like that. And it helps to make public housing sustainable. And public housing being sustainable is absolutely central to our ability to provide good services to public housing residents across Victoria. It is the case that the community housing sector has a different financial model and gets support from the Commonwealth in ways that the public housing system does not. And that makes it the case that growth in housing stock is faster and cheaper and easier to achieve through the community housing system. And so what we've really done, we've tried to get the best blend between both of those models going forward. And the government has really chosen to invest very significantly in public housing across the last 12 months, more so than at any other period in the period, going before this. And that's going to have a real benefit. That's going to have a real impact. There are literally thousands and thousands of dwellings, not yet sufficient, I have to point out, but there are literally thousands and thousands of dwellings that are being upgraded and maintained in a better way because of that additional funding. So it's a complicated question. There are lots of different views on all kinds of different perspectives about it. But at the end of the day, we have way too few houses that are made available for people who are on very low incomes. And every single house that we put into play that is designed for someone on a very low income is a person who's off the waiting list, a person who's perhaps out of homelessness, a person, a victim survivor of family violence who might be able to have a safe and secure home. And this package is for, over the next little while, we're going to be doing 15,000 of those. And, yesterday we did 18. And, there were whole months of years gone by that we didn't do 18 new dwellings with new people moving into them, new opportunities to start a different life.
I'll come back. Can I just say, I will speak to you afterwards about the community housing rent models.
What about the second question?
Well, no, yeah, I think he did answer it.
So yes, we are doing solar panels, and all of our new dwellings will be 7-star Nathers and 5-star Green Star.
Yes.
Hi, my name is F.A. and thank you for the lively discussion. My question is around the $5.3 billion budget. While it's a great number, I'm just curious at what collaboration with private sector that the government is planning earmark this budget for. I know like $1 billion is close to the spot purchase of apartments, but what about like the management? What's the most efficient way the government thinks to deploy and effectively manage this stock that's going to come online effectively?
So Michelle might talk in a minute about the way we're working with the private sector about getting houses constructed quickly and getting construction activity happening in the middle of the jobs crisis. The management of and the other arrangements for the ongoing support of the housing that we're creating, in part is being delivered through the community housing sector, and in part is being delivered through Homes Victoria itself. And we're looking to make sure that our own services are as good as they possibly can be, that we provide as effective, and it's a human rights issue, right? Like we need to provide effective and high quality services to our own tenants, as well as working with the community housing sector and in fact with partners like Assemble or other people, Nightingale, whoever, where it's relevant, on getting the best ideas from other parts of the world as well, whether that be the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, England, Finland, or even Sydney, I guess, perhaps. But Michelle might talk about what we're doing on Stream 4.
Okay, so we do have a private partnerships section, and it is just under $1 billion we're spending on purchasing homes, and we are purchasing 596 homes, which are part of the Home to Homeless programs. We've already put in offers for over that amount, so we're confident that we're going to get those settled soon and get people in them, which is great. And the other part of that was the RFP that we ran last year, where we got the 299 expressions of interest. And that ranges in developments that are ready to build. So one of the developments that we've already purchased will be finished. Construction will be completed in May, and we'll get 20 dwellings come online then. And then another one that we recently invested in, construction will start in May. So they're all through the different streams of the pipeline. Some have planning permits. Generally, they've got planning permits. And some of them, the developers are not necessarily happy to share, because we might have bought 20 houses out of a 200 development building, so that gave them enough money to get the because this is also about the economy and jobs. So we want people to get jobs. I mean, and while I've got the microphone, I'm going to talk about gender equity. I was quite horrified to learn that 12% of women work in this construction property sector. That hasn't changed for 10 years. So, and we all know that women got hit hardest during COVID. They're the ones that lost their jobs first. You know, our over 50s women are the fastest growing homeless people, full stop. So we are encouraging all of our bidders, whether they be designers or whether they be builders, to really look at social procurement and in particular gender equity. And we're grading it at 35% of every bid that comes our way, which I think is higher than anyone else in government's doing, but it's really important to us.
I think we should give a round of applause. That's fantastic. Look, we're almost out of time, and I want to give you a chance to mingle and meet some of the guests here this evening. Unless there are any last comments from any of the panel, can I say thank you for your fortitude. MPavilion have done an outstanding job yet again in a post-COVID environment in finding creative spaces in which we can meet and share points of view and debate public policy. I'd first of all like to thank our panellists this evening, Michelle, Ben, Emma, Chris. I'd especially like to thank the team at MPavilion, and the Naomi Pilgrim Foundation for their ongoing interest and support of the sector in a whole range of ways. Please join with me, and can I just say before we've actually finished, isn't it great to be in a situation where we're talking about how we can make the best of this and how we can deliver for everybody? We're no longer talking about why, we're talking about how we can do it best. So join with me in thanking these fantastic people during the break.